Schools don't fail overnight. They fail one decision at a time. Not the headline decision, not the $1 million one, but the small ones, the daily ones. The moments where leaders choose politics over students, where board ignore numbers and don't ask tough questions, where staff lose trust because their voices don't matter, when people put their personal aspirations and opinions over what's best for the institution. Welcome to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King, and the goal of this podcast is to help you create an ecosystem of academic excellence. Through inspiring conversations, practical strategies, and actionable insights, we empower educators, change makers, and leaders just like yourself, foster trust, collaboration, and provide them ultimately the tools to create an ecosystem of academic excellence. I'll never forget a call I received not too long ago. A school leader's voice on the other end on the line, shaky, broken, and within a panic. Kyle, we're $3.5 million in a deficit. Layoffs are on the horizon. What should I do? Do you have another opportunity that I can take on? Do you have someone that can hire me? It was one of the hardest calls I've received, not just because of the number, not just because of the layoffs, but because I knew it didn't have to be this way. See, schools don't end up in $4 million in the red by accident. They don't fire 22 teachers overnight just because. These things happen because culture is neglected. And here's what I want to remind every leader listening. Culture is created daily. Every action, every inaction, every belief that we enforce or ignore shapes the very environment students walk into. And that environment will either be one of safety, inclusion, and thriving, or one of division, turnover, and failure. So today we're going to sit inside this story. I'm going to unpack what happened, what choices led to this moment, what consequences came from neglecting culture, and finally, the 4 anchors every school needs if you want to avoid being in a position like this in the future. Let me walk you through what this school was facing. One, a $3.5 million to $4 million deficit. 22 teachers laid off. Registrars were potentially going to be gone. The assistant directors at schools were potentially going to be gone. And some staff didn't even wait, to want to be laid off. They quit voluntarily because they saw the writing on the wall. Racial insensitivity, directors not necessarily being on the same page, and board members completely oblivious to the noise that was happening within the school. Parents were pulling their students from this school in droves. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a new problem. The school had missed enrollment targets year after year. They were consistently underperforming, and the board wasn't making wise business decisions. They had partnered with a charter management organization, a CMO, that was crippling them, frankly, for years. These companies often promise the world where it's structure and management and a sense of expertise. But what they deliver is a cookie cutter machine designed to put bodies in seats not built for thriving students. And when you give the keys of your school to a machine, you shouldn't be surprised when it drives your culture off of a cliff. Now, if you're listening to this, you might think, Kyle, that's extreme. But let me ask you this one question. How many schools do you know that are just surviving? Not thriving, not growing, but surviving. Because just surviving is the first stage, in my opinion, of failure. Culture isn't just a mission statement on a wall. I talk about this all the time in the Contagious Culture podcast. It isn't the pep rally chant. It isn't the teacher lunch and dinners. It isn't the gifts or the note cards. It's what happens in the daily grind. Culture is the decision to support teachers when parents complain. Culture is the way you handle discipline. Do you restore or do you kick students out? Culture is the honesty or frankly, dishonesty in budget meetings. Culture is the silence of your voice when you choose to allow injustice to happen. One school I had visited never once spoke out after school shootings, after various injustice, political challenges, or assassinations. They never acknowledged any of the racial injustice when students and parents or even stakeholders of the school were hurting. They never created space for parents to process. But when Charlie Kirk was murdered, they lowered their flag to half staff. Now, whether you agree with that or not is not the point. The point is the school made a choice. They communicated to students, to staff, to parents, to all the stakeholders that this is what matters to us, while the other things do not. Every decision or refusal to make a decision creates culture. And that culture tells your students you are either safe here, you are either supported here, you are either loved here, or you're not. You're either seen here or you're invisible. So let me ask you this. What is your culture asking and saying right now? If I was to have a conversation with a parent, with a student, with a community partner, with a teacher, what would they say about your culture of your organization or of your school? And is it an alignment with what you think they should be communicating? Here's the fallout. And when culture cracks, teachers leave. Not just because of pay, but because they don't feel supported, they don't feel loved, they don't feel valued. Teachers don't want to be silenced anymore. They want to teach with freedom and creativity. Parents become outraged, and rightfully so, because when their voices aren't heard, when they feel policies are inconsistent, when transparency is missing, they lose trust. And then the final piece, students stop taking pride in their school. They stop wearing that logo. They stop believing in that mission. And once pride is gone, discipline problems rise, engagement drops, and when all of this happens, achievement ultimately crumbles. And leaders, like we see time and time again, and at the same school that we're referencing, the leaders get divided. Some want to hold the line, others want to protect their jobs, some want to keep parents happy, others want to keep the board happy, and that division at the top trickles down into every single classroom, every single conversation, and every single decision. This is the hidden cost of broken culture. It's not just about money, it's about trust. And once trust is gone, the numbers only get worse. The issues only get worse. The backlash and fallout only gets worse. And the overall, when the culture of an organization and a school cracks, it begins the first stage to a school failing. So let me be honest about what I believe schools need to stop doing. And I'll be very direct here. I'm tired of seeing schools repeat the same mistakes time and time again, and students are impacted. Stop hiring leaders who don't have the background to lead. If you've never been in the classroom, if you don't know how to build relationships, if you don't know how to balance a budget, if you don't know how to be culturally sensitive, if you don't know how to hold yourself accountable and responsible for inaction or certain actions, why are you leading a school? Stop recruiting board members who come with personal agendas instead of servant hearts. A board seat is not a political platform, it's stewardship. It's not just an opportunity to move the needle of certain things happening within schools that ultimately impact the lives, the futures, and careers of students. It is stewardship, and you must have a heart of harvest to be able to lead from that platform. Stop bringing in people who only want to support students instead of all students. I'm going to say that again. Stop bringing in people who only want to support some students instead of all students. Our children are not pawns in your social experiment. Our students, our Black and brown students, our white students, our Indian students, all students are not pawns in your social experiment. And we must stop outsourcing your school's culture to management companies that care more about enrollment than education. When the strategy is to kick students out if they misbehave, you are creating a culture of fear, not growth. If the strategy is to get butts in seat rather than focus on improving the instructional excellence and leadership, you're creating a culture of failure and not growth. If the strategy is removing people out that are disruptors so that we can have people conform to a system, you are creating a culture of mediocrity and not excellence. Parents may complain. They may say things and be emotional, but at the end of the day, teachers need support. And teachers leave when they don't feel loved. And when teachers leave, when parents leave, when students are disconnected, like I continue to say, the culture collapse. Now let's flip this. What can schools do differently? I believe there are 4 anchors that every school must have, and these are not optional anchors. These are the difference between what I've seen a stable school and a collapse. Now, when I think about anchor 1, it's important that you know your vision. Where are you going? And does every single decision align with that vision? You can't bring in a consultant, a management company, or even a leader if they don't share your vision. If your vision is equity, don't hire someone who's colorblind. If your vision is innovation, don't hire someone who only knows how to replicate. Every budget decision, every hire, every policy has to answer, does this get us closer to our vision or further away? Anchor number 2 is knowing your numbers. And let's be real, numbers matter. Budget matters. Enrollment matters. And you can't dream your way out of a deficit. I like to say, don't buy a car if you don't pay your light bill. But schools do this all the time. They invest in flashy programs or big name partnerships when they already are behind on payroll. So ask yourself, what do we have? What do we need? What will it take to get us there? And if the rainy day comes, if the enrollment doesn't hit, do you have an umbrella or are you going to drown? If the enrollment numbers don't hit the number that you projected, it's unacceptable for us to be laying off teachers when we're already underperforming as an organization. And that leads us to number 3, knowing your people. So anchor number 1 is knowing your vision. Anchor number 2 is knowing your numbers. And then anchor number 3 is knowing your people. Trust is the foundation of every high-performing team. And I'm going to say that again. Trust is the foundation of every high-performing team. And when you think of where your team is performing or how you would measure the performance of your team, you have to ask yourself, how much do I actually trust the leader that's leading us, or the people on the team, or the people on this bus, and where are we going? What people do we need to remove from the bus? What people do we need to include on the bus? And who do we actually need to hire to be the driver of this bus? But all of that won't make sense if we don't know our vision and we don't know our numbers. So when we think about knowing our people, do you trust your teachers? Do you listen to them? Do you give them spaces to lead from the ground up? And on the flip side, who are your culture killers? Who are the people that are toxic? Who on the bus is toxic and leading from a place of division and not from a place of building bridges? Who in administration is dragging your vision down, and who needs to go? Because when you remove and clear the land, it allows us to plant seeds of growth, of excellence, and expectation for us to be able to move the needle forward. At the same time, who needs to rise? Who are your future leaders? Who's ready to step up and carry this vision forward? It's important to communicate that vision, communicate transparently the numbers, but then also communicate to your people what things will be accepted as well as what things will not be accepted. Every school must decide what lines we will not cross. And that leads us to anchor number 4, knowing your non-negotiables. For me, one of these lines is layoffs. I would rather build slow than fire fast. We will not sacrifice people for appearances. Another non-negotiable for me is unity. Leaders may disagree behind closed doors, but when the doors open, we must be unified. because division is what destroys schools. It destroys relationships. It destroys what we're trying to build as an organization. So what are your non-negotiables? What's the line that not anyone can cross? When you think about the 4 anchors, when you think about what you're trying to achieve as a school, when you think about establishing a culture of success, it starts ultimately by knowing your vision. And when we know this vision, it starts to allow us to know our numbers better. Then we must know our people that will help us achieve this vision, but then also the people that are hindering us from achieving this vision. And then we have to write down our non-negotiables. Let me give you a picture of what this can look like in real time. A few years ago, I visited a school that on the outside looked super strong. Website was polished. The mission statement sounded beautiful. The uniforms were crisp. The test scores were just barely hanging on. But when I walked the halls, I noticed something. Teachers were afraid to speak. Parents were confused about the rules. Students walked with their heads down. There was no joy. There was no collaboration. There was no innovation. There was no smiles. And when I sat down with leadership, I asked, what's the vision of your school? And they could answer me clearly. One person said excellence. Another said graduation. Another said college readiness. All good things, but no shared unified direction. Then I asked about numbers. How was enrollment? Silence. How was the budget doing? Dodging the question. And eventually, they admitted, it took time, but they admitted that they were running a deficit, but hoped something would come through. So then I left the administration and started talking to teachers. And when I spoke with teachers, they told me they didn't feel supported when parents complained. Discipline decisions were inconsistent. Leadership wasn't transparent about finances or specific charges or budgetary restrictions. And when I asked students, they said, we don't feel proud to be here. This was the second or third option because I couldn't get into another charter or another private school. The culture breakdown in real time. A school doesn't need to wait for layoffs for a $4 million deficit to know it's in danger. You can see it in the eyes of your staff. You can hear it in the voices of your parents. You can feel it in the silence of your students. So let me ask you this question. If I walked around your school tomorrow, what story would the hallways tell me? Would your teachers feel safe enough to be honest with me? Would your students tell me they're proud to belong? Would your numbers confirm your vision or contradict it? Because here's the truth. You don't need a crisis to make a change. You can start addressing culture today before the budget collapse, before teachers quit, before students disengage, but you have to be willing to see it. Schools don't collapse because of lack of spirit. Spirit is good, but spirit alone doesn't keep the lights on. Schools collapse because leaders neglect culture. Leaders neglect culture. If you are leading from ego, from politics, or from profit, you don't deserve to be in education, period. Our children deserve schools that protect them. Our children, whether you are Black, white, Indian, Spanish, Latinx, whatever it is that you are, our students walking in the hallways of our schools deserve schools and people that support them. Teachers that support and love them, parents that are heard, leaders that honor the vision. Culture is not an accident. It is created daily by you, by me, by every decision that we make. So the real question is, what is your culture saying? Is it saying that students are safe here? Teachers are valued here? Parents belong here? Or is it saying the complete opposite? Because one day when the phone rings and someone says, we're $4 million in the red, what should I do? The answer will depend on the culture you've been creating all along. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. Before you log off, I ask for you to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. And ask yourself this question this one week. What type of culture am I spreading? The energy you bring is the culture you create. And as you know, culture is in everything and is everywhere. Make yours worth catching. We'll see you all next episode.